The Pope's visit to the United States and more on this week's discussion with the academics. Greetings. I'm Lee Dunstan of the Walker College of Business at Appalachian State. Welcome to the academics. Allow me to introduce our panel. Here are Dr. Nancy Love of App State's Department of Government and Justice Studies and Dr. Michael Wade of our History Department. Dr. Paul Gates is away this week. He'll be back next week. Well, panel, we would have to talk about Cardinal Bergoglio, who is elevated to the papacy, Pope Francis, Pope Frank. He seems to be a transformative figure really throughout the world. My question is, it's clear he makes an enormous impression. Are these impressions lasting? Do they really have any kind of real impact over time? Or is he doing something extraordinary to help the Catholic Church bring back lapsed Catholics?
All of the above, I would say.
Okay.
I mean, I think he's giving two messages. He's moving away from Catholic orthodoxy, which could bring back some lapsed Catholics. And then he's also making strong statements on ethics and justice and comparing our Congress people to Moses, delivering the tablets, legislative activity being based on care for the people, and also arguing that politics cannot be a slave to economics and finance, and referring to capitalism as the dung of the devil. Over time, I think if he holds to that message and remains aligned with the poor and is willing to call governments to account for economic inequalities, he's going to have a powerful impact.
I guess my question is he really able to move the ball forward in that regard? Because the essence of modern day conservatism is saying, I'm going to save you from yourself. All you bleeding heart liberals, we're going to save you from yourselves. We care just as much as you do about the poor, about the disadvantaged, but what you're doing is you're spreading all the wealth and you're bringing us all down to some horrible low common denominator, whereas we are going to infuse capitalism and free enterprise and competitiveness into everybody. I see it in my classroom.
They can't sell that.
They can't sell it because it's wrong, or they can't sell it because it's hard?
They can't sell it because it's wrong.
How is it wrong?
It's always been wrong. Trickle-down economics has never worked, and that's exactly why so many members of Congress objected to his use of the term. Trickle-down economics is an offshoot of social Darwinism from the late 19th century, and it's no accident that from the Reagan era on, we've had a lot of social Darwinists in government. They missed environmental Darwinism completely, which also developed in the late 19th century. So no, they can't sell it in an open forum where they actually have to defend their ideas. Trickle-down economics comes down to an article of faith. The evidence for it is not there. Jobs creation is part of that. The job creators, before the 2012 election, the Congressional Research Service, at the request of Congress, did a study on job creation, and they said there was no evidentiary basis for it. They quashed the report because it wouldn't serve them. They couldn't sell it. They can't sell it.
Well, what about just a plain old, almost extinct moderate Republican? What about a moderate Republican who doesn't necessarily advocate trickle-down economics, but is saying stop with all of the social giveaways. That is an enormously bad idea. We need to go ahead and figure out how we're going to get people to engage and love to work and produce. Nancy?
Well, in a recent Politico poll, 33% of the GOP said the Pope was too liberal. But what he's doing is forcing the candidates to take a position on issues that have traditionally been associated with progressives and Democrats. Now, interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders has also said that the Pope's positions are very, very progressive. So he's going to play a role, I think, in the presidential race because the candidates are going to be forced to position themselves on issues that he's saying are moral, not political. I would say they are political, but they're not partisan. They span the party divide.
Let me try to recast this. Liberal, progressive, conservative, moderate, Republican, that's exactly where the people who are opposed to the Pope want this discussion to take place. Let's put it this way. In a primarily Protestant country, which is the United States, it has taken a Jewish democratic socialist and the Pope, Pope Francis, to remind us of the core message of early Christianity. Compassion, mercy, justice, moderation, charity. The Pope understands not only the threat to human civilization posed by climate change, but also its negative implications for the fundamental principles of the Christian church and other humane religions around the world. This is not about liberal or conservative to him. It's about the teachings of the church. Just as it was for it's a moral issue. Just as it was for Abraham Lincoln, who referred to the better angels of our nature, and to Franklin Roosevelt, who said that the four freedoms were a moral responsibility embedded in the American form of government. Let the Republicans and other people who are opposed to all of this talk about that instead of the stuff they've been selling all these
Are you
years.
really going to get very far by creating a kind of a dichotomy? Is it that simple? You're either a trickle-downer or you are a liberal Democrat? I'm not sure it's that simple.
Well, as I said, that's exactly what we need to get away from and get back to. What was the purpose of this government?
Well, Ted Cruz and other right-wing Republicans would say the best way to feed the most people, the best way to educate the most people is to have a completely free enterprise, non-regulatory framework.
Mm-hmm. It isn't working, though. And the Pope has said that the poor have a sacred right to land, lodging, and labor. This is not an argument for a free lunch that he's making here. And so Tea Partiers, evangelical Protestants are going to have to take a position on what you're calling moral issues, and I'm saying they're political issues, but they're not partisan issues. They're spanning this divide.
Is the planet for living, breathing life forms, including human beings, or is it for Exxon and Mobil and banks, including the Vatican Bank, which the Pope is? Will he have an impact? You bet he will. He's fired every director of the Vatican Bank save one.
And I think it's no coincidence that
he's going after the innards where the cancer is.
Yeah, Hillary came out against the Keystone XL pipeline in conjunction with his visit. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, she would never have done that on her own.
So you really, both of you, my dear colleagues, believe that this man is really transformative. I think I'm hearing you say that you think his impact on our society and perhaps on the world is more than just this tremendous feel-good feeling of little babies being brought to him and him putting his hands on them and kissing, which is enormously inspirational. The question is it transitory or does it have a lasting impact?
People feel better when they are able to talk about and believe in and maybe even act on high principles. It's not good for the soul to be selfish and greedy. I think that's just part of we feel better when we're doing things for others. We don't get to do things forever. The message from far too many politicians has been everybody's in it for themselves. You look out for yourself, take care of number one, and anybody who needs help is not deserving of it because they should have been able to make it on their own. That's classic social Darwinism from the late 19th
Nancy,
century.
what about it?
He hasn't said yet how long he's going to be Pope. I think that matters, right? He may not stay in the papacy for as long as would be needed to have a lasting impact. I hope that he will. And in terms of the little babies, that was not just a photo op. That was a Hispanic 5-year-old who was pleading not to have her parents deported and talking about them working hard in the fields, her father in particular. So there's a family message that he's also articulating, even though he's broken to some extent with Catholic orthodoxy, and he's talked about the implications of both poverty and wealth on the decline of the family. So I think he is navigating some incredibly difficult issues in potentially significant ways.
And I don't think that we can forget that this man in his younger life may have been transformed himself.
Mm-hmm. I think.
Do you know about his history?
Yeah.
His history was that he was quite conservative, and that he was putting his foot down as the head of the Jesuits in Argentina, and he's changed.
Yeah.
He has transformed.
Yeah. I think you asked about transformative. I think what is important about him is he offers the prospect of transformation. And he's reminded, I think, all Christians what the core of the religion is and asked them to think about it. And that makes politicians really nervous because it doesn't square with what most of them have been doing.
And interestingly, I noticed yesterday when I watched this that it made one politician do what he does a lot, and I don't use. John Boehner he couldn't. I mean, the waterworks were on,
Right.
and that's probably a good thing.
How is a man like that? I found myself wondering, John Boehner, who can be overcome with emotion at the Pope, and I can fully understand that. How is he not able to stand up and say, yes, this is right, and we need to change some things around here?
Okay, let's move on. Although we hate to leave the Pope, we like this guy, Pope Frank. North Carolina's budget. These legislators finally passed a budget, and what do we think about this? What are the guts of the budget in terms of taxes and so forth? Nancy?
Well, cutting personal income tax, cutting corporate tax rate, extending and elevating sales tax, and then the huge question.
Let me see if I've got this. So we're cutting the taxes that would be considered non-regressive, and we're going to raise the taxes that are regressive.
Bingo.
You've got it.
Bingo.
Wow, the host got it right. So, and what does all that mean to you, Nancy?
Well, close to home, what's going to happen with education. And there, I think it's important to recognize that North Carolina is now 46th in the nation in teacher pay and 48th in the nation in per capita spending per student. We are ahead only of West Virginia and Mississippi. And to the extent that education is an economic engine for our state, we are going to pay a price for that. The other thing to say is some of the educational spending has been deferred. There's going to be a bond issue with the presidential primary in the spring, in March, and we don't yet know what the voters of the state will decide.
And how much will the bond issue be?
The bond issue is $1.3 billion for higher education, for community colleges, and 14 of the 17 UNC system campuses, and it's for capital projects primarily.
This budget is an unfortunate example of the truth of what Jimmy Carter just said this week, that the United States is no longer a democracy. It's an oligarchy of private and corporate wealth devoted to its own globalized, undemocratic interests. President Carter it'd be interesting to see how he fares with the historians. He may or may not be regarded as a great president, but a great man, I think, without question. But what I'd like to get across to our audience is that the result of this budget that you've described is increased financial stress on ordinary citizens and reduced revenue streams for state budgets, which then require budgetary cuts by legislators beholden to the wealthy state and national interests that funded their election campaigns. Some of those elected officials in this state are actually employed by those special interests, including tax-exempt charitable and religious organizations, which seem to live very well on their nonprofit status. So with some sleight of hand to provide a defense against honest criticism, the cuts get directed at public services, particularly education, as can be readily observed by the North Carolina budget since the 2000 election when these people took over. Corporate and other special interest subsidies are protected.
Well, we need to kind of be honest with ourselves, don't we? It's pretty clear, if you look at the history of what has happened over the last several years, that the legislature is very suspicious of education, very, very suspicious, and is not going to fund it the way it used to be funded, does not view it the same way that it had been viewed in the past. What is really going on? What is really going on in the mind of a good faith Republican legislator? What do we think is really going on? Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. What are they saying?
Yeah. Well, I have two thoughts there. The first is that Noam Chomsky has now compared the 2008 recession/depression to 1928 in the Weimar Republic, and has said there's a loss of faith in existing institutions. And that includes education. So that's the first thought. Second thought is that as educators, we need to do a better job informing our legislators of the work that we do and its value for public discourse and for the citizens of the state. In other words, our job as educators includes sustaining democracy in North Carolina. And I think we need to be delivering that message.
Okay. Are there any ways that we could do that?
Through public dialogue, through community educational institution partnerships, and through making it clear that we're not simply asking for more money, but that we are delivering important services to the citizens of this state. And I don't mean just vocational training, skills-based education. In a democracy, we want citizens who can think.
But you see, and there's the rub. The very nature of oligarchies is they don't want a public discussion. It's not in their interest.
Hold it, I got to push back. Are you really saying that these folks sitting down in Raleigh have made a conscious decision, or many of them, not all of them, but many of them, that they'd like to have a dumbed down electorate moving through the educational system that is not going to be able to hold them to account?
Well, let me answer your question with a question. If that's not the case, then why promote a brand of education which is primarily vocational in higher education? And eliminate or emasculate the very parts of higher education which go to an educated citizenry, because that's what they're doing.
Giving them the benefit of the doubt. Nancy, can you give them the benefit of the doubt?
Well,
I would say that the reason is that they don't fully appreciate the notion of nuance and ambiguity that impacts all of our lives every day, 1,000 times a day. And that they think, erroneously, that the arts, as we understand them, are not nearly as important as these vocational, professional training.
Those arts and the humanities provide the very skills that they're complaining their employees don't have.
Of course, of course. And so...
So you're right on that. But consider this. If that is really their interest, they want those kinds of bright, questioning people, then why have we been treated for the past 5 years to a government which won't explain to us, won't engage when there are questions about what they are doing? We've got a legislature that operates in secret to an extent that even legislators complain about it. We've got a board of governors in this state which has terminated the president of the UNC system and will not offer an upfront explanation about why that was.
Nancy?
Well, your question, though, was about the good faith Republican legislator. And there, I think...
A rare breed.
Maybe, but let's appeal to people's higher interests. We began with the Pope's visit to America. So what I would say is that the message that needs to be communicated is that as educators, and I'm speaking now from the perspective of the humanities, we teach Plato as well as Marx. We teach Shakespeare as well as Alice Walker. That for our students of the state to be trained in history and literature and philosophy is not necessarily to train them as progressive intellectuals.
No, it's to train them to think and to ask questions, as Hemingway said, to have a built-in crap detector.
Exactly. But I would submit that we failed. We failed to communicate that truth, that absolutely powerful truth. We failed to communicate it, and to some extent, this responsibility falls on us. I mean, we seem to be allowing ourselves to be perceived as special pleaders, saying we need to have another 3% raise. We need to have we need to have the buildings not falling down around our ears. Of course we do, but why can't we wrap this in the truth of what it is a truly educated human being is, and that you can't have a society doing anything well unless,
one problem with getting that question
like
today across these days is that we now have a whole panoply of administrators and institutions across the country who really are not on board with that message. They're basically career administrators whose career path depends on going along with these larger trends in education, which are largely corporate and technocratic. So it's hard to get a hearing, first off. Let me say this finally, in the interest of fair play to the legislators and people who have genuine concerns about the cost of education. More and more of the money in education has gone not to teaching students, but to overhead, to administration, to ancillary services which don't go to instruction at all. There's been a huge increase in the size of student services in most American universities. And if money is to be saved and if the focus is to be restored primarily to classroom instruction, then it's pretty obvious, I think, where the attention needs to go.
Quickly, we need to speak truth to power as educators, and on two fronts. I think we need to communicate what has really happened with teacher pay in this state, which is a 15.7% decline since 2002 when you control for inflation. These are the conditions under which we're being asked to do our work. And then the work that we do is vital for the future of this state and this nation.
Two things for the audience primarily. Most of us did not get into this to get rich. That's really not the primary concern when we talk about salaries. I think the public school teachers have fared even worse. We got into it because we believe in what we're doing, and it's hard to sit back and watch it being eroded. The other thing is this. There's been a lot of talk about Republicans. Many of us don't have a particular political persuasion. We're nonpartisan. I got a call from the Democratic Party the other day asking me to do something, and I had to tell them, I said, I'm not a member of the Democratic Party. This is these concerns are real, and they don't go to partisanship or self-interest.
Exactly.
I'm not sure I know what to say about this other than I think this discussion has been terrific. I promise you, if I'm in this chair again, we're going to continue this discussion. This discussion needs to be continued, and we need to flesh it out even more and more because it does have 2, 3, 4, 5 sides to it. Thank you for joining us on The Academics. We'd like to hear from you. Please contact us with your questions and comments at watchapptv.com. Until next time, I'm Lee Dunstan. Thank you for watching.